poor black woman works 5 jobs a day until one day police officers changed her life. In this heartwarming and powerful story, follow the incredible journey of Dawn, a hardworking single mother who juggles 5 jobs just to make ends meet. But when a life-altering event involving the police changes her destiny, everything she thought she knew about survival is turned upside down. Filled with unexpected twists, moments of suspense, and the triumph of hope over hardship, this is a tale of resilience, love, and second chances that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Watch as Dawn's life takes a dramatic turn, but be prepared. Nothing is as it seems. If this is your first time on our channel, take a moment to subscribe to our channel as we dive into the full story. To our returning subscribers, thank you for always watching and liking our videos. Now let's get into the full story. The sun barely peeked over the horizon as Dawn Taylor hurried down the crowded sidewalk, her worn shoes pounding the pavement in rhythm with her heartbeat. She had 5 jobs to get to today just like every other day. Dawn's life was a never-ending cycle of work. From cleaning office buildings at dawn to waiting tables during lunch, followed by babysitting in the evening, janitorial work at night, and finally delivering newspapers before sunrise. There was no rest. Each job was a fight for survival. Her small one-bedroom apartment was home to her and her 9-year-old daughter, Tasha. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Dawn lived in a rough neighborhood, where the sound of sirens and gunshots often pierced the night. Her neighbors struggled too, barely scraping by in a world that seemed determined to keep them down. But Dawn had dreams even if they felt impossibly far away. Every night as Tasha slept beside her, Dawn would whisper promises. "I'll get us out of here one day, baby. You'll have a real home and you'll never have to worry." But with each passing year, those promises felt harder to keep. Her shifts blurred into one another and exhaustion tugged at her every step. Dawn felt the weight of it all. The bills piling up, the rent overdue, and the constant fear of being evicted. But she kept going. She had to. On one particularly grueling day, Dawn rushed through her janitorial shift at the local police station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the halls smelled of coffee and cold metal. She scrubbed the floors while the officers passed her by, rarely sparing her a glance. But one officer did, Officer Reed. He was a tall, quiet man with sharp eyes and a kind demeanor. Over the past few months he'd noticed Dawn's relentless work ethic. There was something different about her, a quiet strength that stood out in the sea of faces. One evening after her shift, Officer Reed approached her. "Dawn, right?" he asked, his voice deep but soft. Startled, she looked up from her mop. "Yes, sir. I see you here every night working hard. 5 jobs, huh?" Dawn nodded cautiously, not used to attention from law enforcement, especially in her part of town. "Why do you work so much?" he asked, genuinely curious. Dawn hesitated. "I have to. For my daughter. For Tasha." She wasn't one to share her struggles, but something about Officer Reed's sincerity made her open up a little. Officer Reed listened intently, his heart heavy with her story. He didn't say much, but the wheels in his mind began to turn. Dawn didn't realize it, but this moment would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Life as usual didn't get easier. Dawn's health began to decline due to her brutal schedule. She often felt dizzy and her hands trembled with exhaustion. But the bills didn't stop and neither could she. One night while walking home from her last job, Dawn heard footsteps behind her. She quickened her pace, clutching her bag tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. The streets were eerily empty. Suddenly she felt a hand grab her from behind, yanking her into a dark alley. Fear surged through her. She struggled, but her attacker was too strong. Dawn's world spun in terror. Just as she thought it was over, red and blue lights flashed, and the wail of sirens filled the air. Police officers swarmed the alley, pulling the man off her and arresting him. Officer Reed was one of the first on the scene. He rushed to Dawn's side, his face pale with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Dawn, shaken but alive, nodded. Tears streamed down her face as she realized how close she had come to losing everything. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Reed shook his head. "Just take care of yourself. That's all." The following day, Officer Reed couldn't shake what had happened. He knew Dawn needed more than a rescue, she needed a break. He spoke with his captain and shared her story. Inspired, they decided to do something radical. A few days later, Dawn received a call to come to the station. Confused and nervous, she went. When she arrived, she found the entire police department waiting for her. "We've seen how hard you work," Officer Reed said, stepping forward. "And we want to help." Dawn's heart raced as they handed her a folder. Inside were documents offering her a full scholarship to a local community college, arranged by the officers. They had also pooled together money to help cover her rent for the next 6 months. Dawn's hands trembled as she held the papers. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You don't have to say anything," Officer Reed replied, smiling. "Just promise us one thing, don't give up." Tears filled Dawn's eyes as she realized her life was about to change forever. Dawn sat in disbelief, staring at the papers in her hands. It all felt surreal. For so long life had been nothing but a series of struggles. She never imagined that people she barely knew could care enough to help. Thank you so much," Dawn whispered, her voice cracking. The officers gathered around her, each offering smiles and nods of encouragement. Officer Reed walked up beside her and handed her another envelope. "This is a little something from us," he said. Inside she found several $100s, all donations from the officers at the station. "It's not much, but it should help get you and Tasha through the next few weeks." Dawn's hands trembled. "I can't believe this. I don't deserve." "You do," Reed interrupted. "You work harder than anyone I know. You deserve a break." That night, Dawn went home with a heart full of hope for the first time in years. She hugged Tasha tightly, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that their future wasn't just an endless cycle of hardship. She had a real chance at making things better. Starting college wasn't easy. Dawn had been out of school for over a decade, and stepping into a classroom full of younger students made her feel out of place. But she was determined. Her first few weeks were overwhelming, filled with late-night study sessions and early morning shifts at her remaining part-time jobs. She still worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, but the burden was lighter with the help she received from the police officers. And knowing that she was building something better for Tasha gave her strength. One afternoon, after finishing a particularly difficult exam, Dawn received a call from Tasha's school. Her heart dropped as she answered. "Miss Taylor, there's been an incident," the principal's voice said. "Tasha was bullied by some older kids and things got physical." Dawn rushed to the school, her mind racing. When she arrived, she found Tasha sitting in the nurse's office, her face bruised but her spirit unbroken. Dawn held her daughter tightly. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here," she whispered, though inside her anger simmered. That night, Dawn couldn't sleep. She thought about how hard life had been for Tasha. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, constantly struggling with not having enough. Dawn had always tried to shield her from the worst of it, but she knew the reality. It was in that moment Dawn's determination deepened. She wasn't just going to make a better life for herself. She was going to change everything for Tasha. Just as things seemed to be turning around, a shadow from Dawn's past returned. One evening, as she was coming home from her shift at the diner, she noticed a figure standing near her apartment. It was her ex, Marcus, a man she hadn't seen in years since he'd been in and out of jail. Marcus had once been a charming presence in Dawn's life, but as his troubles with the law deepened, he became more dangerous. She had left him for Tasha's sake, but now, seeing him on her doorstep, all those old fears came rushing back. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" Dawn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I heard you've been doing well for yourself," he said with a sneer. "I'm just here to check in, see how my family's doing." "We're not your family," Dawn replied firmly, her heart racing. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You've got money now, don't you? Got the police on your side too? You owe me, Dawn. Don't think I've forgotten." Dawn's pulse quickened. She knew Marcus wouldn't just go away. His demands would only escalate. She had to protect Tasha, but the fear of what Marcus might do was overwhelming. Terrified, Dawn reached out to Officer Reed the next morning. She explained Marcus's sudden appearance and the implied threats he had made. Reed's expression grew dark as he listened. "We'll handle it, Dawn. You shouldn't have to deal with him alone." Within a day, Marcus was arrested for violating his parole, but the incident left Dawn shaken. She realized how fragile her newfound hope was, how easily it could all slip away. But instead of falling into despair, she found strength in the support system she now had. Officer Reed continued to check in on her regularly, and some of the other officers at the station offered to help in any way they could. It was as if after years of fighting alone, Dawn finally had a team in her corner. As months passed, Dawn's hard work began to pay off. She completed her first semester of college with honors, surprising even herself. Her professors encouraged her to pursue a degree in social work, something she had always felt passionate about but never thought she could achieve. Tasha too began to flourish. The bullying stopped and she made new friends at school. Dawn found herself smiling more, laughing more, and for the first time she allowed herself to dream. One evening after dinner, Tasha asked, "Mom, do you think we'll ever have a house? A big one with a yard and maybe a dog?" Dawn paused, her heart swelling with emotion. "I don't know, baby. But I do know we'll have something better than we've ever had before." Tasha grinned. "I believe you." And so did Dawn. She had come too far to stop now. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, the unexpected knocked on her door again, this time in a way she could never have predicted. Late one night there was a knock at the door. Dawn's heart skipped a beat as she opened it and found Officer Reed standing there. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by something more serious, more urgent. "Dawn," he said quietly, "there's something you need to know." A chill crept down Dawn's spine. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Was Marcus back? Was something wrong with Tasha? "Come in," Dawn said, her voice barely a whisper as she stepped aside. Officer Reed entered, his eyes scanning the small apartment before resting on Dawn. "I didn't want to tell you this over the phone. It's about Marcus." Dawn's heart pounded. "What about him? He's still in jail, right?" Officer Reed nodded. "Yes, but that's not the issue. We've been investigating him for a while now and we've uncovered something much bigger. Marcus has been involved in a dangerous criminal ring for years. We're talking about organized crime, drugs, trafficking, things far worse than we initially thought." Dawn's legs felt weak and she sank onto the couch, her mind reeling. Marcus had always been trouble, but she never imagined he was part of something this dark. "What does that have to do with me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Officer Reed hesitated. "We've received information that Marcus had been watching you for a reason. The people he was involved with, they know about you. They know about the help you've received from us, and they think you're a threat to their operations." Dawn's breath hitched. "A threat? I'm just a mother trying to get by. Why would they come after me?" "They see you as a loose end, Dawn. Marcus's arrest put you on their radar and they don't take risks when it comes to protecting their business." Reed's voice was low, but the gravity of his words hit like a punch to the gut. For a long moment, Dawn couldn't speak. Her mind was spinning with fear and confusion. How had her life taken such a dark turn? Just when things seemed to be looking up, she was now facing a danger she never could have imagined. "What do I do?" she finally whispered, looking at Officer Reed with wide, terrified eyes. "We're going to protect you," Reed said firmly. "We've already arranged for you and Tasha to be moved to a safe house. We can't take any chances. This is serious, Dawn." Dawn sat there in shock, her thoughts racing. Move to a safe house? Leave behind everything she had fought so hard to build? It seemed impossible, but deep down she knew there was no choice. The next morning, Dawn and Tasha packed their most important belongings, which wasn't much. The safe house was in a neighboring city, far enough from their current neighborhood that no one would know where they were. Officer Reed personally drove them there, his quiet presence comforting in the midst of chaos. The safe house was a small, modest place tucked away in a quiet suburb. It wasn't home, but it was safe. Dawn felt the weight of it all settle in as she unpacked Tasha's clothes, her mind still racing with the reality of their situation. Tasha, sensing her mother's unease, asked, "Mom, why are we moving again? Is everything okay?" Dawn knelt down in front of her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's just for a little while, sweetheart. We need to stay somewhere safe, that's all. But I promise you, everything is going to be okay." Tasha nodded, trusting her mother completely. But as Dawn looked into her daughter's eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from okay. Days turned into weeks as Dawn and Tasha adjusted to life in the safe house. Officer Reed checked in regularly, providing updates and reassurance that the police were closing in on the criminal ring. But the anxiety never left Dawn's chest. She felt like a ticking time bomb waiting for the next disaster to strike. One evening, while Tasha was asleep, there was another knock on the door. Dawn opened it to find not only Officer Reed, but also two detectives in plain clothes standing behind him. "Dawn, we need to talk," Reed said, his face more serious than ever. They sat down at the small kitchen table and one of the detectives spoke first. We've made progress in our investigation into Marcus's criminal activities, and we've discovered something unexpected. It turns out that Marcus wasn't just using you as a pawn. He had something hidden in your apartment. A flash drive with information about his criminal network. That's why they were targeting you. Dawn's stomach turned. A flash drive? I had no idea. The detective nodded. It was hidden well, but we found it during a search. The information on it is enough to bring down the entire operation. But here's the twist. Marcus had planned to use it as leverage. He wanted to cut a deal with the authorities, but before he could, he was arrested. Dawn's mind reeled. Her ex had been using her apartment as a safe house for incriminating evidence, and now because of that her life was in danger. She felt sick. So what now? Dawn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We're closing in on the ring, Officer Reed said. But it's dangerous. The information we've uncovered puts a target on both Marcus and anyone close to him, including you. But with your cooperation we can ensure your safety and bring down the entire operation. Dawn felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had never wanted to be involved in any of this, but now her life and Tasha's was at stake. Whatever it takes, Dawn said, her voice steady. I'll do whatever I need to protect my daughter. The days that followed were a blur of strategy meetings, late-night phone calls, and constant surveillance. Dawn became a key witness in the case, and with her help, the police built a solid case against the criminal organization. But the danger was far from over. One night, just as Dawn and Tasha were settling in for bed, a loud crash echoed through the house. The front door had been kicked in and masked men stormed inside. Dawn's heart raced as she grabbed Tasha, pulling her close. They were here. The people Marcus had betrayed had found them. But before the men could reach them, red and blue lights flooded the street, and the sound of police sirens filled the air. Officers swarmed the house, guns drawn, and within minutes the intruders were apprehended. Officer Reed was the first to rush inside. Are you both okay? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Dawn, shaking but unharmed, nodded. We're okay. In the days that followed, the criminal ring was dismantled and Marcus was sentenced to life in prison. Dawn's testimony had been crucial in bringing down the operation, and in exchange the police provided her with witness protection and a fresh start. Dawn and Tasha were relocated to a new city, far from the dangers of their old life. They were given new identities, a new home, and a new chance at life. For the first time in years, Dawn felt free. The weight of fear and poverty had lifted, and she knew she had a future full of possibilities. Months passed, and Dawn found herself thriving in her new life. She completed her degree and found work as a social worker, helping families who were going through struggles like the ones she had endured. Tasha excelled in her new school, finally able to live the carefree life of a child. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their new home, watching the sun set, Tasha looked up at her mother. Mom, we made it, didn't we? Dawn smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. Yes, baby. We did. And for the first time in a long time, Dawn believed it. They had not only survived, but they had triumphed. They had found hope, love, and a future they never thought possible. The road had been hard, but now their lives were brighter than they had ever been before. While Dawn and Tasha settled into their new life, a sense of calm enveloped their days. Yet underneath it all, Dawn couldn't shake the feeling that her past hadn't completely left her behind. As she walked Tasha to school each morning or sat with her cup of coffee at the kitchen table, she would find herself thinking about Marcus, the criminal network, and the dangers they had escaped. It was a rainy Tuesday when the knock came at the door. Dawn had been sitting in the living room, going over some paperwork for her new job, when the sound echoed through the house. At first she hesitated. The police had assured her that no one knew where they lived, not even distant relatives. Slowly she got up and approached the door. Through the peephole she saw a man standing there, soaked from the rain. He wore a black trench coat, his face obscured by a hat pulled low. Dawn's heart began to race. She didn't recognize him, and something about his presence filled her with dread. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door slightly, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary. The man looked up and Dawn froze. It was someone she hadn't seen in years. "Marcus," she whispered, her stomach flipping with shock. The man standing there wasn't Marcus, at least not the Marcus she remembered. His face was thinner, gaunt even, and there was a desperation in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked older, worn down by whatever life had thrown at him since they last spoke. "Dawn, I need your help," he said, his voice raspy and strained. Every instinct in Dawn's body screamed at her to shut the door, to lock it and never look back. But something in Marcus's eyes stopped her. There was fear there, real, palpable fear. Against her better judgment, she unhooked the chain and opened the door a little wider. "Why are you here?" Dawn asked, her voice a mix of confusion and anger. "You're supposed to be in prison." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I got out. Early. But it's not what you think. I wasn't released because of good behavior or anything like that. They let me go because they knew I wouldn't survive long on the inside." Dawn's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "They're after me, Dawn," Marcus said, stepping closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "The people I used to work for, the ones you helped take down, they've got connections everywhere. I was a dead man walking in that prison. I managed to escape, but now I have nowhere else to go." Dawn felt a chill run down her spine. "Why come to me? I can't help you. You're the reason I was in danger in the first place." "I know," Marcus said, his face full of regret. "And I'm sorry, Dawn. I really am. But you're the only person who knows what it's like to be caught up in this mess. I need somewhere to hide just until I figure out my next move." Dawn's mind raced. She had worked so hard to distance herself from Marcus and the dangerous world he was part of. Letting him back into her life, even for a moment, could put everything she had built at risk. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the fear in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. "Please, Dawn," Marcus begged, his voice cracking. "I have no one else." For a long moment, Dawn didn't know what to say. She had always prided herself on being strong, on doing what was right for her and Tasha. But Marcus was standing there, drenched and broken, pleading for help. "I can't let you stay here," Dawn finally said, her voice firm. "I have a daughter, Marcus. I can't put her at risk." Marcus's face fell, but he nodded as if he had expected this answer. "I understand. I do. But if you can't help me, I don't know how much longer I'll survive." Dawn felt a pang of guilt, but she knew she had to prioritize her family's safety. "There has to be someone else who can help you. Friend? A lawyer?" "There's no one," Marcus whispered. "Not anymore." Dawn stood frozen in the doorway, battling the internal storm raging inside her. She couldn't just turn her back on someone she had known for so long, even if that person had caused her pain. But she also couldn't jeopardize the safety she had finally found. After what felt like an eternity, Dawn made a decision. "I can't take you in, Marcus, but I'll help you get in touch with someone who can. I'll call Officer Reed. Maybe he can figure something out." Marcus's shoulders slumped and he nodded, though disappointment clouded his eyes. "Thank you, Dawn. I didn't expect much, but thank you." Dawn stepped back inside and quickly grabbed her phone, dialing Officer Reed's number. As the phone rang, she kept her eyes on Marcus, who stood silently in the rain, his fate hanging in the balance. "Reed," a familiar voice answered on the other end. "Officer Reed, it's Dawn. There's something you need to know. Marcus is here. He's at my door." There was a pause on the line before Officer Reed's voice came through, tense. "Keep him there, Dawn. Don't let him leave. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Dawn hung up the phone and looked at Marcus, her emotions swirling. "Reed's on his way," she said quietly. "Just wait." Marcus nodded but said nothing, his eyes full of something Dawn couldn't quite read. Fear, regret, or maybe something darker. When Officer Reed arrived, he wasted no time. He approached Marcus, his hand resting on his holster, ready for anything. "Marcus, you're in a lot of trouble. Running only makes things worse." "I know," Marcus replied quietly. "But what choice do I have? They're going to kill me." Reed's expression softened slightly. "We can protect you, but you need to cooperate fully. No more running. No more hiding. You've got to trust us." Marcus hesitated, glancing at Dawn. "Can I really trust you this time?" Officer Reed nodded. "Yes. But you need to trust us first." As Marcus reluctantly agreed to go with Reed, Dawn watched from the doorway, her heart heavy. She wasn't sure if Marcus could ever fully escape his past, but in that moment she knew she had done the right thing. For the first time she felt that maybe, just maybe, her new life was truly beginning. As Marcus was escorted to Officer Reed's car, Dawn stood on the porch, watching him through the rain-soaked window. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her. Her past with Marcus, the chaos he brought into her life, and the delicate future she was trying to build with Tasha. But now maybe things would be different. Officer Reed had promised to protect Marcus, and if anyone could keep him safe from the criminal network that had once been his life, it was Reed. Dawn had seen firsthand how far Reed and his team were willing to go to clean up the streets, to make the city safer for people like her and Tasha. She watched as the car pulled away, the headlights cutting through the misty rain, and felt a sense of closure. Maybe this was the last time Marcus would need her. Maybe this was finally the end. But as Dawn closed the door and sat back down, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Marcus had always been unpredictable, and the danger surrounding him didn't seem to fade with his departure. She tried to shake off the worry, focusing instead on her work and Tasha's homework that needed checking, but that lingering feeling wouldn't go away. Days passed and life slowly began to return to normal. Tasha thrived at school, bringing home stories of new friends and teachers who adored her. Dawn worked hard at her new job, earning praise from her boss for her dedication. It seemed for a moment that things were finally falling into place. Yet the shadow of Marcus's return hung over her, growing darker with each passing day. One evening as Dawn was preparing dinner, the phone rang. She wiped her hands on a towel and answered. "Hello. Dawn, it's Reed," came the voice on the other end, calm but serious. Her stomach dropped. "Is everything okay?" Reed sighed heavily. "Marcus is missing." Dawn's heart raced. "What do you mean missing? You said you'd protect him." "We were. But he disappeared from the safe house 2 nights ago. He was supposed to be under constant surveillance, but it looks like he slipped out. We've been searching for him since." Dawn felt panic rising in her chest. "Do you think they got him?" "We don't know yet. It's possible he's hiding again, trying to figure things out on his own. But Dawn, I need to warn you. If he's on the run and they know about you, they could come after you next." Her blood ran cold. "What should I do?" "I'm sending officers to keep an eye on your house just in case," Reed assured her. "But be cautious. If anything seems off, call me immediately." As soon as she hung up, Dawn's mind began to race. The idea that Marcus had disappeared, and that dangerous people might come looking for him through her, filled her with dread. She paced the kitchen trying to think clearly. He had to stay strong not just for herself but for Tasha. That night, Dawn barely slept, her ears straining for any sound outside. The shadows in the room seemed darker, the house creaked in ways it hadn't before, and every car that drove by made her jump. Her heart pounded in her chest, even as she lay there trying to convince herself that everything would be fine. But deep down she knew something was coming. Something bad. It was late in the evening, a few days after Reed's call, when Dawn heard it, a soft knock at the door. The same dread she had felt when Marcus first showed up washed over her, only this time it was worse. She crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. The sight of the person standing there sent a wave of terror through her. A man, tall and dressed in all black, with a hood covering most of his face, was standing outside. He looked menacing, and though Dawn couldn't see his eyes clearly, she could feel them burning through the door. Her hands shook as she backed away, her mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. He had come for Marcus and maybe for her. She grabbed her phone and quickly dialed Reed's number. "Reed, someone's at my door," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay calm, Dawn," Reed said, his voice sharp and alert. "Lock the door. Don't answer it. I'm sending officers to your location now. Stay on the line with me." Dawn did as she was told, locking the door and moving quietly to the back of the house, where Tasha was playing. She couldn't let her daughter see her panic. As she reached the back room, the knocking at the door grew louder, more insistent. Whoever was out there wasn't leaving. She held Tasha close, trying to keep her voice steady as she whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're safe." But she wasn't so sure. The man outside had a purpose, and something told her he wouldn't leave until he got what he wanted. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Dawn waited for the police to arrive. Every thud on the door made her heart jump and her grip on Tasha tightened. She whispered soft reassurances to her daughter, but inside her mind was screaming with fear. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Dawn heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The man at the door must have heard them too, because the knocking stopped abruptly. She listened carefully, but the silence was just as terrifying. Had he gone? Was he waiting outside in the darkness? When the police arrived, they searched the area but found no sign of the man. Officer Reed came inside, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. "Dawn, we need to move you and Tasha to a safe location," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We can't take any chances. Dawn nodded, knowing that her life had once again been thrown into chaos. Whatever was coming, she would have to face it head-on, just as she always had. The next morning, Dawn and Tasha were relocated to a safe house on the outskirts of town, guarded by 2 police officers. Dawn had never felt so vulnerable, or so determined to protect her daughter at all costs. But deep down she knew the danger wasn't over. The man who had come to her door wasn't going to stop until he found Marcus, and if she didn't find him first, they were all in danger. Dawn realized she had only one option left. She had to confront Marcus. She had to find out what he had done, why he had disappeared, and what he knew about the people coming after him. If she didn't, they might never be safe. But this time, Dawn wasn't going to be a victim. She was going to take control of the situation, and do whatever it took to protect her family. Dawn lay awake in the safe house that night, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Tasha was asleep beside her, unaware of the storm brewing around them. Dawn knew that staying hidden wouldn't solve anything. The man who knocked on her door wasn't going to give up. He would keep hunting until he found what he was looking for, Marcus. And in the process he could destroy everything Dawn had worked so hard to build. She couldn't let that happen. Not again. As the moonlight filtered through the curtains, Dawn made a decision. She was done waiting for others to protect her. She would find Marcus herself and end this nightmare before it spiraled any further. With renewed determination, she quietly slipped out of bed, making sure not to wake Tasha, and grabbed her phone. She needed answers, and she knew just where to start. Early the next morning, after ensuring Tasha was safe under the watchful eye of the police, Dawn ventured out into the streets of the city, her heart pounding with fear but also a sense of purpose. She made her way to an old contact of Marcus, a man named Terrence who ran a small underground nightclub known for its shady dealings. Marcus had once mentioned that if he ever needed to disappear, Terrence was the guy to talk to. The club was in a rundown part of town, the kind of place where people minded their own business and looked the other way. Dawn hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The dim lights and heavy bass of the music made the atmosphere thick with tension. She could feel eyes on her as she walked through the crowded room, but she ignored them. She had one goal: finding Marcus. After a few minutes, she spotted Terrence in the back, sitting in a booth with a couple of his men. He was a large man with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. Dawn took a deep breath and approached him. "Terrence," she said firmly, trying to hide the fear in her voice. "I need your help." Terrence raised an eyebrow, looking her up and down. Well, if it isn't Marcus's old flame. What brings you to my club?" "I'm looking for Marcus. He's missing and people are coming after him. I need to find him before they do." Terrence leaned back in his seat, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And why should I help you, Dawn? What's in it for me?" Dawn stared at him, refusing to back down. "Because if Marcus goes down, so do you. Whoever's after him won't stop until they've cleaned up every loose end. You help me find him and maybe we all walk away from this." Terrence studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But I'll help. But if Marcus is in deep, this isn't going to be easy. You'd better be ready for what comes next." "I'm ready," Dawn said, though the knot of anxiety in her stomach told her otherwise. Terrence gave her a name and an address. A place where Marcus had been staying off the radar, hidden from both the police and the dangerous people after him. Dawn felt a surge of hope but also a creeping dread. She was getting closer, but she didn't know what awaited her on the other side. The address Terrence gave led Dawn to a dilapidated building on the edge of the city, far from the safety of the police or anyone who could help her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the crumbling structure. As she approached, Dawn felt the weight of the situation settle heavily on her shoulders. This was it, there was no turning back now. She climbed the stairs to the apartment and knocked on the door. Her heart raced as she waited, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing Marcus, disheveled and on edge. "Dawn?" he asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and fear. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," she said, stepping inside quickly and closing the door behind her. "You're in danger, Marcus. And so am I." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I know. I didn't want to drag you into this, but things got out of control. I thought I could handle it." "Well, you can't," Dawn snapped, her anger bubbling to the surface. "People are coming after you, Marcus. And they came to my house. I'm not waiting around to see what happens next. You need to tell me everything." Marcus sat down heavily on the couch, his face grim. I got involved with some bad people, Dawn. They're part of a criminal syndicate and I owe them money. A lot of money. I thought I could pay them off and walk away, but they don't work like that. Now they're hunting me and anyone close to me. Dawn felt a chill run down her spine. So what do we do now? I've been trying to get enough cash together to pay them off, Marcus explained. But it's not enough. They want blood. Dawn's heart sank. She had hoped for a way out, but it seemed Marcus had already sealed his fate. And now, by extension, hers. As they talked, a loud crash came from outside the door. Dawn and Marcus froze, exchanging a look of horror. Someone was coming. Marcus stood up, his face pale. They found me. The door burst open and 3 men stormed into the room, their eyes cold and dangerous. Dawn recognized the man in the lead. It was the same one who had come to her house, the one who had knocked on her door. He was the enforcer, the one who made sure debts were paid. Marcus, the man said with a chilling smile. You've been a hard man to find. Marcus stood between Dawn and the men, his hands raised. I'll pay you. Just give me more time. The enforcer shook his head. Time's up. Dawn's heart pounded in her chest as the situation spiraled out of control. She could see the violence in their eyes, the intent to make Marcus, and possibly her, pay for his mistakes. There was no reasoning with them. In that moment, Dawn realized that the only way out was to fight. Summoning all her courage, she grabbed a heavy lamp from the nearby table and swung it at the closest man. The surprise attack gave Marcus a split second to act, and together they fought desperately to defend themselves. But the odds weren't in their favor. Just as it seemed the fight would end in tragedy, the sound of sirens filled the air, and the room was flooded with blue and red lights. The police had arrived and the enforcers scattered, knowing their time had run out. Dawn collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as Officer Reed and his team stormed in, securing the scene. It was over. Dawn sat in the corner of the room, her heart still racing as the flashing lights and the chaos of the moment slowly faded. The police officers moved swiftly, cuffing the enforcers who had scattered and subdued Marcus. Officer Reed walked toward Dawn, his face calm but full of concern. Are you okay? Reed asked, kneeling beside her. His presence felt like a lifeline amid the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Dawn nodded, though she felt anything but okay. The last few hours had been a blur of fear, violence, and uncertainty. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered, her voice shaking. I was just trying to protect us. You did the right thing by fighting back, Reed reassured her. But it's clear this situation has spiraled far beyond what you could handle on your own. We'll get Marcus to safety and make sure these guys face justice. Dawn glanced over at Marcus, who was sitting in handcuffs on the floor, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. He had been running from his mistakes for so long, and now it seemed like the past had finally caught up with him. Dawn felt a strange sense of closure, but also an overwhelming sadness. I'm sorry, Marcus said softly, meeting Dawn's gaze. I never wanted to put you in danger. Dawn's emotions were a tangled mess. Part of her wanted to be angry, to lash out at him for dragging her and Tasha into this nightmare. But another part of her, the part that had loved Marcus once, knew that he had been trying to protect her in his own way. She didn't know how to feel. It's over now, she said, though the weight of everything still sat heavy on her chest. We just have to move forward. Over the next few days the dust began to settle. Dawn and Tasha were moved back into their home under police protection while the investigation into the criminal syndicate unfolded. Officer Reed kept a close watch, making sure they were safe from any lingering threats. Dawn tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but nothing felt the same. Marcus remained in police custody, facing charges for his involvement with the syndicate. He had agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for leniency, but it would still be a long road ahead for him. Dawn visited him once, unsure of what to say but feeling like she needed to close the chapter between them. You didn't have to come, Marcus said when she walked into the visiting room, his voice filled with remorse. I don't deserve it. I know, Dawn replied, sitting down across from him. But I needed to see you. I needed to understand why. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. I got caught up in the wrong things, Dawn. After I lost my job, I felt like a failure. I wanted to make it up to you and Tasha, but I made every wrong choice possible. By the time I realized what I'd gotten into, it was too late. Dawn nodded, her heart heavy. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did, but I hope you find a way to fix your life. Marcus looked down at his hands. I'm going to try. I don't want Tasha to grow up thinking I was just a coward who ran away from everything. They sat in silence for a few moments before Dawn stood to leave. As she walked away, she realized that while Marcus's chapter in her life might be closing, she still had so much to fight for. Weeks turned into months and slowly life began to take on a new rhythm. Dawn continued working hard to support Tasha, but with a renewed sense of purpose. She no longer felt trapped by her circumstances. The police investigation into the syndicate had uncovered more corruption than anyone expected, and many of the people who had threatened her and Marcus were now behind bars. Officer Reed became a more regular presence in Dawn's life. At first, it was strictly professional. He was ensuring her safety and keeping her informed on the case. But over time, Dawn realized that Reed had become someone she could rely on, someone who genuinely cared about her and Tasha. One evening, after a particularly long day, Reed stopped by with takeout and a smile. I figured you could use a break, he said, handing her a bag of food. Dawn laughed softly, the weight of the world feeling just a little lighter. You always know when to show up. They sat together on the couch, eating in comfortable silence. Tasha had fallen asleep in her room, and for the first time in a long time, Dawn felt a sense of peace. Reed had become more than just a protector. He had become a friend, someone who understood her struggles and stood by her side without judgment. As they talked and laughed, Dawn found herself thinking about the future in a way she hadn't before. She didn't know where things with Reed might go, but for the first time she felt like she was allowed to dream of something better. Months later, the final trial for the criminal syndicate concluded, and Marcus was sentenced to a reduced term due to his cooperation with the authorities. Dawn had mixed feelings about the outcome. She didn't wish ill on Marcus, but she also knew that his choices had deeply hurt her and Tasha. She hoped he would use his time to truly reflect and rebuild. As for Dawn, life had taken a surprising turn. With Reed's support, she had enrolled in a program to help single mothers get better-paying jobs. She was working fewer hours now, but with more stability, giving her more time to spend with Tasha. One day, while sitting at the park with Tasha watching her daughter play, Dawn thought back to the woman she had been just a year ago, tired, struggling, and hopeless. So much had changed, and while life was still hard, it was filled with hope and possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine before. Officer Reed sat beside her, watching Tasha with a smile. You've come a long way, he said. Dawn looked at him, feeling grateful. I couldn't have done it without you. He shrugged modestly. You did most of the work. I just showed up. They shared a quiet laugh, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Dawn allowed herself to believe that things were going to be okay. The struggles weren't over, but Dawn had learned that she had the strength to face whatever came next. And with Reed by her side, she knew she wasn't alone in the fight anymore. As the sun set over the park, Dawn stood up and called Tasha over. It was time to go home, to their new life, where hope had finally found a place to grow. The days that followed were filled with the kind of peace Dawn had almost forgotten existed. The constant grind of working 5 jobs, always wondering if she would make it to the next day, seemed like a distant memory. But it wasn't just about the absence of struggle, it was the presence of something new. Hope. Dawn's new job allowed her to spend evenings at home with Tasha. Every night they would cook dinner together, laugh, and talk about Tasha's day at school. Sometimes Officer Reed would join them, and his presence had become something Dawn looked forward to more than she'd expected. Their bond had deepened, not just from the turmoil they had been through, but from the quiet moments that followed. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Reed brought up an idea that caught Dawn off guard. Have you ever thought about going back to school, Dawn? He asked, looking at her with a seriousness that showed he wasn't just making casual conversation. Dawn blinked, the question hanging in the air between them. Back to school? For what? I don't know, Reed shrugged. But you've got a lot of potential. You're smart, hardworking, and you deserve a chance to do something for yourself. Something that will give you a real future. The idea of going back to school was one Dawn had buried long ago. When she became a single mother, her dreams took a back seat. Life had become about survival, and pursuing education seemed impossible. I wouldn't even know where to start, she admitted, a little embarrassed. There are programs that help single parents like you, Reed explained, leaning forward. I can help you look into it. You've already proven you can handle more than most people ever could. This could be your chance to build something lasting, something you're passionate about. Dawn felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: excitement. Could she really do this? Could she carve out a new path for herself and Tasha? "I'll think about it," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she felt the beginning of a new dream taking shape. Over the next few weeks, Dawn found herself researching different career options and educational programs in the evenings after Tasha had gone to bed. The more she looked into it, the more the idea of going back to school felt less like a far-off fantasy and more like a real possibility. Reed helped her find programs that offered flexible schedules, knowing that she couldn't afford to quit working entirely. One night, while scrolling through potential courses, Dawn came across something that piqued her interest: a social work program. As she read through the details, she felt an unexpected connection. The thought of helping others, people like her who had struggled through impossible situations, stirred something deep inside her. She thought about all the times she had felt alone, like the weight of the world was too much to bear. If she could be the person who helped someone else through that, it would give all her struggles a deeper meaning. The decision came quickly after that. Dawn applied to the program and within a month had been accepted. She stood in her small kitchen, staring at the acceptance letter with disbelief. It was really happening. Tasha, sensing her mother's excitement, asked, "What's going on, Mom?" Dawn crouched down to Tasha's level, her heart swelling with pride. "Mommy's going to go back to school. I'm going to learn how to help people just like Officer Reed helped us." Tasha's face lit up. "That's amazing. You're going to be a superhero." Dawn laughed, feeling the warmth of Tasha's words. Maybe she wasn't a superhero, but she was going to become someone who made a difference. And that was enough. Enrolling in the social work program was the easy part. Balancing school, work, and being a mother was where the real challenge began. Dawn's days became a whirlwind of classes, assignments, work shifts, and late nights helping Tasha with homework. But despite the exhaustion, there was something fulfilling about this new chapter in her life. Reed continued to be a constant support. He would stop by after his shifts, sometimes bringing dinner, other times just offering company while Dawn worked through her school assignments. Their friendship had grown into something more, though neither had directly acknowledged it yet. One evening, after a particularly long day, Reed sat with Dawn in her living room, watching Tasha play with her dolls nearby. Dawn rubbed her temples, trying to shake off the fatigue of juggling everything at once. "You look like you need a break," Reed said, handing her a cup of tea. Dawn sighed, smiling gratefully. "You're not wrong. It's just a lot. But I can't complain. I wanted this." "You don't have to do it alone, you know," Reed said gently. "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his voice made Dawn's heart skip. She had spent so long being independent, doing everything herself because she had to. But with Reed, she didn't feel the same need to shoulder it all on her own. He was offering her more than just help, he was offering her a real partnership. Dawn met his gaze, her heart full. "I know. And I'm grateful for that." As the months passed, Dawn found herself thriving in her social work program. She was learning more than she ever thought possible and discovering a passion she hadn't realized she had. Her professors took notice, and her classmates often turned to her for advice and support. Tasha too was flourishing. She loved school and had made new friends. She often boasted to them about how her mom was going to help people and how Officer Reed was like a superhero in their lives. One evening, after a long day of studying, Dawn sat down with Reed and Tasha to a quiet dinner. They laughed and talked like a family, a real family. And for the first time in years, Dawn felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Looking around the table, Dawn realized how far she had come. She had fought through the darkest moments of her life and come out stronger. And now, with Reed by her side and Tasha growing up happy and healthy, she felt like the future was wide open. As they finished dinner, Tasha looked up and asked, "Mom, do you think everything is going to stay good like this?" Dawn smiled softly, her heart full. "I think we've been through enough to know that no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. We've got each other. And that's what matters." And as the evening settled around them, Dawn knew in her heart that they were no longer just fighting to survive. They were building something beautiful together. Just as everything seemed to be falling into place, life threw one more unexpected challenge Dawn's way. One afternoon, while Dawn was at work, she received a call from Tasha's school. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered, fearing the worst. The school nurse was on the line, informing her that Tasha had fainted during recess. Dawn's hands trembled as she listened, feeling her old anxiety bubble up. She rushed to the school, her mind racing with fear. At the hospital, the doctors ran several tests. Dawn sat by Tasha's side, clutching her little hand as they waited for answers. Reed arrived soon after, his comforting presence easing Dawn's nerves, but not the deep worry gnawing at her. Hours later, the doctor returned with a somber expression. Tasha has a condition called anemia. It's not life-threatening, but it explains the fainting. We'll need to adjust her diet and keep her on supplements to boost her iron levels. Relief washed over Dawn, but there was also a new concern: medical bills. Despite her stable job, healthcare costs loomed large. For a moment, Dawn felt like she was slipping back into the financial uncertainty she had worked so hard to escape. Reed, sensing her worry, took her hand. "You're not alone in this, Dawn. We'll figure it out together." His words reassured her, but deep inside, Dawn knew she needed to stay strong for Tasha, just as she always had. She couldn't allow herself to be defeated by fear. In the days following Tasha's diagnosis, Dawn and Reed adjusted their lives to ensure Tasha's health was the top priority. Dawn researched meal plans and made sure Tasha took her supplements on time. Reed was there every step of the way, offering his support and love, making Dawn realize just how much she could depend on him. Tasha, resilient as ever, adapted quickly. She followed her mother's instructions, eager to feel better and get back to playing with her friends. Her spirit was strong, and Dawn drew strength from her daughter's courage. Dawn's coursework continued, though she now had a new challenge of balancing her studies with Tasha's needs. It wasn't easy, but every time she felt overwhelmed, she remembered how far she'd come. She wasn't the woman who worked 5 jobs anymore. She was someone who could handle anything life threw at her, because she had to, for Tasha and for herself. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Tasha leaned against her mother. "Mom, I'm proud of you. You're doing so much and you never give up." Dawn smiled through the tears that welled up in her eyes. "You're the reason I keep going, baby. You and this new life we've built together." Reed, sitting next to them, smiled at the sight of the two of them. He had watched Dawn transform over the past months, and his admiration for her grew deeper every day. "I have something to ask you both," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Dawn and Tasha looked at him, curious. Reed took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and I can't imagine my life without either of you in it. Dawn, I love you. I love Tasha. I want to build a future with you both. Will you marry me?" The room went silent. Dawn's heart raced as she processed his words. For so long she had been afraid to lean on anyone else, afraid of being hurt or let down. But Reed had been there through everything, and his love had never wavered. He had become family in every sense of the word. Tears filled her eyes as she smiled. "Yes, Reed. Yes, I'll marry you." Tasha's face lit up with excitement and she jumped into Reed's arms. "We're going to be a real family." A year later, Dawn stood at the small altar set up in a park under the afternoon sun. It was a simple wedding, surrounded by close friends, co-workers, and a few people from the community who had watched her journey. Tasha stood beside her, beaming in a flower girl dress, and Reed waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving Dawn. As she walked down the aisle, memories of her struggles flashed in her mind. The long nights of working 5 jobs, the fear of never being enough, the uncertainty of her future. But now, every step she took was toward a new chapter. A chapter of hope, love, and a future she had fought so hard to create. After the ceremony, as they celebrated with laughter and joy, Dawn realized that the life she had now wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was built on perseverance, faith, and the kindness of others who had seen her potential even when she couldn't. Reed took her hand as they watched Tasha play with the other children. "We did it," he said softly. Dawn smiled. "We did. And we'll keep doing it together." The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Dawn knew that with Reed and Tasha by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. And for the first time in her life, she believed that anything was possible.